relentless warfare against the despicable, dope-peddling vultures.
America's public enemy number one is drug abuse.
Our most serious problem today is cocaine.
Illegally peddle these deadly poisons.
Half the crime is caused by narcotic
addicts. We will find you, we will arrest you, and we will hold you accountable.
Drug offenders will commit more than 100,000 crimes on this day.
These people are killing our kids. These people are disrupting society. These people are wrecking our society.
Welcome, this is the Dr. Junkie Show, and I'm your host, Ben Boyce, an addicted person who's experienced my fair share of punishment for my substance use. Of course, none of it worked, because you can't punish addiction. And that's what this episode is about, punishment, and why it will never work to solve our issues with drugs. We should start with some groundwork. You see, I live in the United States, a culture with a lot of issues, but perhaps none as glaring as our refusal to acknowledge that we have any problems. We tend to live in a state of chronic wokeness, and even if you're someone who represents an oppressed identity, you probably still feel like things are quite a bit better than they were 100 years ago, and much better than they were 100 years before that. That constant cultural progress, what Martin Luther King Jr. called the universe's moral arc, it lets us get away with forgetting that there's still a ton of work left to do. What's that have to do with punishment and addiction? It turns out a lot, because the margins of any culture are where you will have the easiest time spotting oppressive policies or disenfranchised groups. And since addiction is, for all intents and purposes, illegal in the United States, it's a marginal space. It's deemed outside the norm, unacceptable for the mainstream, cause for removal from the larger social body. So those of us who live in addicted bodies live our lives in marginal spaces, on the edge of existence and incarceration. That's why it's called the margins, as in sidelines, edges, the places and people most of us don't encounter every day. Anytime you experience something out of the ordinary, you're in a marginal space. Marginal spaces are where the moral arc is revealed to be twisted, and sometimes even bent back upon itself. But as long as the rest of us don't have to see that very often, as long as it remains marginal, we can rest cozy in the illusion that things are going just fine, that the work is mostly done. If you look into these spaces, you'll notice that despite the adage that addiction takes all kinds, it actually doesn't, at least not equally. And there's a reason that we ignore the differences in those who are more prone to addiction than others. It's largely a wealth issue. And that means we aren't supposed to talk about it, because accumulated wealth is supposed to be the status quo in the United States, the taken for granted that everyone's headed towards. The American dream is supposed to guarantee that everyone is treated mostly equal, and that anyone can work through the same set of obstacles to their success to come out the other side victorious. Challenging that story is unpopular. That's why the difference between people prone to addiction isn't talked about very often. But it's a pretty glaring difference. Addiction rates in people who make less than $20,000 per year are 3 times those of people who make more than $50,000 a year. In other words, addiction appears to be a disease associated with poverty. It's not hard to figure out why. Think about it. What do you do if you want to get out of your own head and just chill out? If I want to blow off some steam or have a good time, I have a lot of options, and I'm not even rich. I'm not only privileged to have options like recording a podcast, thanks to y'all, or putting together a lesson for an upcoming class, or writing an article in some sort of popular press, but I'm also financially secure enough to buy some happiness, pardon the cliche. Of course I can't outright buy happiness, at least not yet, but I can buy a lot of things that make me happy. A couple hours ice skating at the local rink, a few dozen laps at the nearest go-kart track, a walk around one of Denver's many museums, a lunch date with my honey. And I'm also able-bodied and pretty fit, plus fortunate to live outside of the major city limits of Denver, so I can hop on my bike and hit the BMX track or the local trail system. I can shoot some hoops, throw my dog a frisbee, take a walk, take a drive, or even hike the beautiful Red Rocks Amphitheater just 15 minutes from my house. For me, all of these things flip switches and press buttons in my brain. And as I've talked about before, I've worked really hard to make those buttons as big and as easy to press as possible. But I still have to be able to push them if they're to work at all. And I am, in many ways, very lucky to have as many buttons and levers as I do. But what if I didn't have access to some of that stuff? Or all of that stuff? What if I lived in the inner city and had no backyard? I couldn't throw my dog a frisbee or ride my bicycle down a trail. If I wasn't able-bodied, I'd have to rethink most of my physical activities. If I didn't have $25 to blow, I wouldn't be able to hit the go-kart track or the museum at all. If I didn't have a car or a driver's license, I wouldn't be able to drive there even if I had the $25 to spend. See how fast wealth gets wrapped up with fulfillment? You might not be able to buy happiness, but you can sure as hell buy distractions and experiences which aid in our construction of happiness. But only if you can afford it. That's why crack cocaine was so devastating to low-income communities across the United States and across the globe. It wasn't because crack is more addictive than cocaine. It's not. They're the same drugs, so that doesn't even make sense. But crack has a few interesting properties which allowed it to be sold in small amounts, less than $5 each sometimes. And that's an amount of money that almost anyone can come up with, even if they can't afford anything else. Unlike its powdered counterpart, crack also doesn't crumble into a powder or break apart very easily. It is, per its nickname, more like a rock. You can cut or break off a small piece from a larger chunk, and they'll both hold their shape for the most part. So where users had needed to buy at least $25 to $50 worth of cocaine to prevent the dust from sticking to the baggie or being digested slowly in their gut, users could buy just a few bucks worth of crack and go straight to the moon. Since it's smokable, it also kicks in all at once, since the lungs are so much more efficient than either the stomach or the sinuses when it comes to delivering a drug to the brain. Users who can't afford enough powder coke to get high can afford enough crack to blast off. Unfortunately, the high lasts the same amount of time as regular cocaine. Again, they're the same drug. So that $5 rock burns up really fast, leaving the user even more bored and depressed than before. Without treatment or relationships or fulfillment or purpose, we often do the math and make the rational choice to just keep using more crack. When we think about punishing people for addiction, the basic reasons why people use drugs should immediately interrupt our thinking. Of course, when someone is so unsatisfied, depressed, or bored that they're going to smoke up their only $5 in a crack rock, we won't ever fix them by making their situation worse. They're using crack because their situation is already worse. You can't punish addiction. You might be thinking, what about drug courts or forced participation in 12-step programs? Aren't those technically forms of punishment that do help some people? Despite what you've probably been told your whole life if you live in the United States, 12-step programs are not scientifically shown to be effective in any way. The stories from successful 12-step members are empowering, but they're cherry-picked from the people who are still there. Those who spend a few weeks, months, or years in the program would often classify themselves as successfully working it while they're there, but as soon as they leave, they're not there to tell their stories anymore, so they don't show up in the data as failures. The 12-step program is designed to make sure that only those who are interested in working the program show up to the program. If you aren't interested in working that specific program or vocally verifying your constant support of it, you still might find invaluable support in relationships with other successful navigators of addicted brains who you meet there. But not if you aren't there. And you won't be there, because your refusal to follow the program rules will almost certainly result in somebody asking you to not be there. At least not until you're ready to work the steps and get clean and sober. The numbers don't lie. Around 45% of attendees at any given Alcoholics Anonymous meeting say they've been sober for 5 years or more, and around a third would say they have less than a year under their belt, but they're working the program. But you won't be able to interview the 90% of people who stop attending those meetings within the first 90 days, or the half of those who remain that still don't make it through a first year. That's 95% of the people who drop out within the first year, but the program still claims a high success rate by only referring to the 45% of members who are 5 years or more sober and are still there. That's not how statistics work. While I'm talking about 12-step programs, it's worth remembering that they're moralistic to the core. Sure, we say that we think addiction is a disease, but that's mostly to make us feel better as we throw people in prison in the morgue when they have it. The only treatment for this so-called disease is to sit down in a room with other people like you and give yourself to a higher power, admit you're powerless, and then work to, quote, make amends. That's moral, religious claptrap, thinly veiled as treatment. If we really thought addiction was a disease, we would never require anyone to seek God or powerlessness or amends for bad behavior because we wouldn't see it as a bad behavior. Diseases are not bad behavior. Punishment and shame-based 12-step programs don't cure addiction. Abstinence-only alternatives to 12-step programs, if there is such a thing, they don't work any better, at least not according to the data. But there's good news, because we already know the best way to get an addicted person to stop using drugs. It's to get them to want to stop using drugs. And as we've seen across the globe in study after study, experiment after experiment, the best way to get people to want to stop using is to give them their damn drugs and make sure that they can get treatment, therapy, or medical care if and when they decide that they want to reduce or halt their use. When they're on board with their own treatment, the process of recovery always works better. But we don't do that. The United States is a nation infatuated with locking up our neighbors, and we're really bad at doing anything else. Incarceration doesn't reduce drug use or crime after release. Punishment does not reduce addiction, and our forms of punishment in the United States tend to make criminal offending worse. One study conducted in Baltimore followed a group of 1,300 addicted people and found that 1 out of 5 injection drug users stopped using between 1988 and 2000. Those who spent time in jail were half as likely as those who did not to be in the group who stopped using. Another study found the same thing in Canada from 1996 to 2005. Recent incarceration made it half as likely for an addicted person to have stopped using. These aren't new studies. We've known for a long time what needs to happen to fix our current problems with drugs in the United States, but we don't care. It's even more obvious when we look at kids. One U.S. study found that between 1990 and 2005, kids who were given custodial sentences, like jail or juvenile hall, were 3 times more likely to be arrested as adults than those who were charged with the exact same crimes as kids, but given non-custodial sentences, like probation or house arrest. Jails and prisons clearly make the problem worse. And it's been that way for as long as I've been alive. More than half of those released from prison go back for new charges within 5 years or less. It's not the people who go to prison, it's the prison, what we experience when we're there. A different study conducted in Canada found that kids who had contact with the juvenile justice system were 7 times more likely to be rearrested as adults than kids who committed the same crimes but were never caught. If those kids were sentenced to confinement, either in a juvenile facility or a reform school, they were 37 times more likely to commit an arrestable offense as adult than their fellow childhood criminals who managed to avoid arrest. And yet we keep locking up kids when we know it affects them the way it does. Incarceration creates criminals, and punishment makes addiction worse. Our current system of punishment is not only moralistic, but it's impossible to reconcile with the reasons why people use drugs in the first place. And it's contrary to our biology as humans. People addicted to cocaine or methamphetamine show reduced brain activity during punishment. That means punishment doesn't work as well for them, neurologically speaking. And that's because addiction is a learning disorder, not a disease. We aren't making bad choices based on good information. We're actually failing to change our behavior when punished, or when we encounter unsatisfactory results. It works like this. We find a drug or a behavior that makes us feel better, and we learn to come back to it the next time we want to feel better. That's normal learning. But when that drug or that behavior stops working, and we don't learn to stop coming back to it, we're experiencing disordered learning. If I can't comprehend that 2 + 2 = 4, and in my mind it always comes out to 5 every single time, I might be wrong, but you can't beat, starve, shame, or abuse me into coming to a different conclusion. That would take treatment, not punishment. And that treatment would need to be removed from any poisonous religious propaganda or moralistic stigma. You can't punish a learning disorder, like addiction. The good news is, unlike punishment, which doesn't work at all and often has the opposite effect of increasing drug use, reward does work. And it works pretty well. Around 2/3 of addicted people in one study, again linked in the description, elevated reward over punishment. They overvalued reward but felt normal about punishments. Again, that makes sense given what we understand now about addiction. That means in addition to making drugs safe, legal, and cheap, which has been shown to reduce use and crime related to it in other countries already, we'd also want to create incentivization systems, like Dr. Carl Hart did when he offered participants in one of his studies who were daily users of drugs a small monetary reward in exchange for skipping a dose. In case you're wondering, the money was less than the amount of drugs they could have bought with it. So he knew it wasn't because users could just make a logical choice to skip his dose and buy more drugs later on. And what he found was that users could not only make reasonable choices about trading their dose for a reward, but they could also plan for the future and make logical decisions about deals that would pay off, say, traffic tickets or get them off probation. We don't need a bigger stick to cure our addiction crisis. We need a bigger carrot. Remember, the United States incarcerates more than 20% of everyone on Earth who's incarcerated, even though our population is less than 5% of everyone on Earth. We also, relatedly, are the highest rates of marijuana and cocaine addiction in the world. For those who think we should just increase punishment to get better results, consider Iran, Afghanistan, or Russia, the Philippines, and Brazil, all of whom currently punish drug users and dealers much harsher than the US, sometimes even with death. Yet they see 2 to 3% of their population use heroin or opium every year, compared to around 0.5% in the United States. The idea that punishment is the solution to addiction, or that tough love and rock bottom somehow help addicted people into recovery, it's not only untrue, it's dangerous. Punishment makes addiction worse. It doesn't matter how much we spend on the war on drugs. Addiction and drug use rates have remained relatively consistent through the last 50 years, even though spending on the war has increased by more than 3,000%. Between 1980 and 1985, around 6% of the U.S. population had been diagnosed with some sort of substance abuse disorder or addiction at some point in their life. In a similar study conducted between 2001 and 2005, one that used slightly different diagnoses because the DSM had been updated, more than 10% of the population fit the DSM-5 label for drug abuse or dependency. Punishment makes addiction worse, so we punish addiction. Incarceration makes criminality worse, so we incarcerate people when they're convicted of crimes. Stigma makes struggles related to neurodiversity more difficult, so we continue to stigmatize those who are not what Audre Lorde called the mythical norm, the imaginary target of U.S. consumerism who represents the average of all citizens, as if we can really melt them all down in a melting pot and take out a scoop. But the mythical norm doesn't exist, at least not in real life. That's actually why advertisers use it so often. It's bound to make everyone feel insufficient in some way. We'll never measure up. Guess we better buy that latest gadget or beauty product to make ourselves feel a little bit better about it. We're all being held up to a measuring stick which none of us can reach, and one we wouldn't even want to. We're at a breaking point, and a change is coming soon with our drug policy. The old models just can't work anymore. Information and goods move far too fast and freely. We can't keep locking up, prosecuting, and stigmatizing drug users and dealers in a world that has autonomous drones and anonymous cryptocurrencies. It won't be long before you can have a verified darknet dealer drop a package from a drone over your house. That is, once you've already read his reviews and paid him with a relatively untraceable crypto. We have to get ahead of this and legalize all drugs. In a regulated market, of course. I feel bad for my people who deal drugs, and believe me, I've read your annoyed emails and comments. But I think we can be just as compassionate to them as we can be to the millions of law enforcement officers who are also going to lose their jobs, the jail and prison COs, and the web of industries that support it all. Lucky for us, people in this country really like drugs. We spend $100 billion on illegal drugs every year in the United States. None of it taxed. Let's be the world leader we claim to be and knock off this war on drugs shit already. It's far past time. Love yourselves and the addicted people in your life. I'm Ben Boyce.
This very day, violent drug offenders will commit more than 100,000 crimes on this day alone. And the sad part is that we have no more police in the streets of our major cities than we had 10 years ago. And what the president proposes won't help much. What he proposes is no increase over what the Congress has already approved last year. In a nutshell, the president's plan doesn't include enough police officers to catch the violent thugs, not enough prosecutors to convict them, not enough judges to sentence them, and not enough prison cells to put them away for a long time.
If you're still here, you might want more. So consider checking out my book, Dr. Junkie, One Man's Story of Addiction and Crime that will challenge everything you know about the war on drugs. You can get it wherever you buy books. If you want to know what the world would look like if drugs were legal, or why we develop tolerance and sensitization to drugs when we take them for extended periods, or if you just want to know why I went to prison, check out the book.